is for the power intensive sectors, and we have a production function and use some econometric estimates. Here these are the linkages. Now for me this is an important one. You have hydel power sector, you have an industry sector, and if you have more hydel power, this is the conceptual linkages between the different sectors. You have more industry. Hydel power is also related to the tourism sector. There may be negative or there may be positive impacts. The negative impact is if you have more hydel power, and that is, there can be two kinds. There are run-of-the-river projects and there are reservoir-based projects. Reservoir-based projects will result in some decrease in the forests. And run-of-the-river projects, if there are a whole lot of run-of-the-river projects in the upper catchments, they change the ecology of the region. So they have a negative impact. But power has a positive impact on tourism because it provides better services and tourists come to the state. So there is a positive impact of hydel power on the tourism sector and a negative impact, which is shown by those two things that I have up there. Now the tourism sector, the forest ecosystem services. Are people familiar with what an ecosystem service is? I mean the students or anyone who would like to. You know that forests provide some kinds of services for human well-being. Now what are these services? Just give me an example. Anyone would like to volunteer? Someone from amongst, yeah.
A carbon sink.
A carbon sink, that's right. But more easy things. Carbon sink is a very specialized kind, but it is there, of course. First of all, it provides timber, provisioning services, non-timber forest products. Forests also provide a whole lot of, they provide honey, they provide flowers, they pardon?
Resins.
Yes.
Resins that
NTFP, non-timber forest products. Then there are also hydrological services, like downstream water bodies are better maintained if you have forests upstream, some species. Everything has to be qualified in the ecological context. Then, so you have provisioning services like timber and non-timber forest products. You have regulating services like the carbon sink and hydrological functions of forests. And you have cultural services. Cultural services is where tourism falls. The cultural services may also have other aspects. It could even be the services. Anyway, I'll stop at tourism for cultural services. So there are forest ecosystem services, and these have been actually quantitatively assessed in certain situations, in some situations. Then you have your industry, which helps you to get industry, which of course is dependent on hydel power. There is a positive relationship. So less hydel power may mean less industry, per capita state domestic product, and then you have these services. So this is the link that I'm going to try to quantify in the context of Himachal Pradesh. Also, one must remember that it's a centrally driven power strategy. Now that means that a great deal of the power which is produced in Himachal Pradesh is going to be sent to other states. It's going to be sent to other states. Now this is a tricky question, something to do with central state relationships, because after 2015, the Himachal Pradesh Development Report says that its own power requirements will be met by the power that it gets by 2015. So should it be exporting this power? Now these are the environmental concerns, and here I have run-of-the-river projects and reservoir projects. Forest land submerged per megawatt of power under run-of-the-river projects is low, 0.114. And run-of-the-river projects have higher externalities, multiple dams, interference with riverine ecology. These are the impacts of run-of-the-river projects which I was referring to. Now this slide just tells some of these things, talks about some of these things. And this is the details. Now how much of these details do we want? This is the identified power potential in Himachal Pradesh. This is the detail completed by 2012. This was expected to be done 15,000 megawatts, and this was the balance later. Now one very complex slide, but I am putting it here because it brings out that most of the power projects are run-of-the-river ones, except two which are reservoir projects, the Renuka Dam and the Coal Dam. And these are the projects which are also in a way responsible for more of forest land being submerged. So as an example, we said, suppose you don't have these two, which is only about 1200 megawatts of power. So the trade-off that we have tried to find out is reduce power consumption by not having just these two. Forget all the others, you know, they'll have their own impacts. If you talk to the ecologists, they don't like run-of-the-river projects because a number of them are being undertaken in the upper catchments of the rivers. And if you have the water being moving from one tunnel to the next tunnel to the next tunnel, the whole riverine ecology is changed in the upper catchment. But forget all that. As economists, we are talking of only two small projects not being there, Renuka Dam and Coal Dam, and trying to look at what impact this will have on the economy of the state. And what impact it will have on the economy of the state is what we try to find out. Now this is just to give you an idea of what went on behind the scenes in the slides that follow. We have two scenarios for 2030. We are in 2012. Let us say this work was done in 2010-11. So by 2030, we had scenarios. One was the reference scenario and one was the sustainable development scenario. In the reference scenario, we use past data to estimate parameters and find out the value added for three sectors. This is value added. Now I'm assuming that the students are familiar with some of these terms. Value added by the sector. This is the three sectors, the tourism sector, the forest sector, and the industry sector. And these depend on power. Power enters everywhere, and you have some of these production functions being estimated. Forget how they are done. We use past data taken from 1980 to 2005 to estimate these parameters. These are some of the things that economics will teach you later as you are here. And then we assume two reservoir-based plants to be dropped and measure impacts on these sectors. Now I'm not going into all this. I'm just trying to tell you, maybe I should tell you intuitively what these three are. Oh God. To stay on the same page between that and that, there is a change in state domestic product due to a change in the power supply. This is the change. This is the total change in income under sustainable development. So if you have sustainable development, this is the change in income. There will be a change in power supply. This is the change in value added of industries. The direct effect of power on tourism income. Tourism income is increased with power because if you have good power supply in the tourist resorts, people will come. indirect effect of power on tourism through change in forest area, then this is the change in ecosystem services due to change in forest area because of power projects. So these are all the elements that we were able to capture and get what happens when you have two projects being dropped and some that much megawatts of power is not being produced. Industry will be growing less, that's what we say. Tourism will be growing less on one count and growing more on the other count. So that is all that I have really said in this slide. Now the next one. Now I've mastered this trick of going to the same slide in both places. Now here we are. We have, these are the results now. What should we look at? You had, this is the state level estimates. You have, this just to give you an idea of how we did it. Commercial power, kilometers of roads and dense forest area. This determines tourist arrivals. So the argument is tourist arrivals depend on how much forest area, which is really capturing the scenic beauty, which most tourists say they were looking for. Kilometers of roads, connectivity and power. So if there is connectivity, if there is power and if there is natural beauty, you have tourists coming. And we captured all that with the Indian tourists, with the foreign tourists, some regression methods that are used, forget this. And then we get district level and state level estimates now. Oh my, this is even more complex. But it gives you an idea. I look at only 2012 and 2030. Forget these are all the manufacturing sector output, the tourism sector output. The tourism sector increases here in this under sustainable development and under the reference scenario. So you have a sustainable development scenario and a reference scenario. In the reference scenario, you have some outputs till 2030. In the sustainable development scenario, you have some outputs till 2030. Now, argument is, I'll give everything in a graph, but the graph won't capture the everything. So tourism, fitted income from tourism increases compared to the refsen scenario. Manufacturing is, the sustainable development is 56 and 58. Just look at this figure and this figure. It decreases from 58 to 56. Tourism increases marginally. So you are getting, this is what we have here now. Value added by industries goes down. The refsen is higher than sustainable development. So obviously the Himachal Pradesh that you are thinking of in 2030 will have less of industry. It is, the red one is below the blue one. This is your sustainable development and that is the reference scenario. Tourism is slightly higher. The sustainable development is slightly, scenario is slightly higher. But behind all this, the loss percentages are given. And I skip that and we get the loss percentage. Now, what is the percentage of loss in the state domestic product if you go for sustainable development scenario? That's what we have got here. Agreed, there is a loss in the state domestic product, but where is the gain? What are the things we are gaining? I'll come to that. That loss is 0.004% of the state domestic product. Look, this is all in percentage terms. 0.004% of the state domestic product. So your sustainable development scenario gives you a slightly smaller net state domestic product. But where are the gains? You're getting your, this is capturing, this is still a very economistic approach that we have adopted here. It's capturing the state domestic product in the manner in which this is usually done. So that's where you are. And I'm going to go back and forth and come back to some of these other things. So preserving those two national parks with Renuka Dam, which was, and Kol Dam, these are the two controversial dams. Incidentally, Renuka is also the dam which will not help Himachal Pradesh so much. Most of the water is going to come to Delhi. Delhi is getting its drinking water supply from Renuka Dam, or is projected to get its drinking water supply from Renuka Dam. So that's another part of the story, which some of you may be aware who have been working in policy matters. Now, preservation of is still economically justifiable. Now, these are national parks and you have a biodiversity. Yeah.
I'm sorry for the intervention, but then as you allowed us to query in between. Ma'am, this part you told just now, that Renuka Dam will have an impact, negative impact on Delhi's drinking water supply. I hope it was not accounted for in this graph, which shows a very minute change in GDP of Himachal. So, I mean, where that part could be accounted for? If a project is having an external impact on somewhere else, so is it not to be accounted for, or how do we arrive at? Because otherwise it gives a very good picture that we are doing a nice balancing out by doing away with the project.
No, the point you are making is the one that I had sort of slightly referred to earlier, but it's very important. Let's look at it. Because should planning be centrally focused, or should it be looking at a state? Now we are looking at a state at the moment. That's the parameters within which we are working here. I said state domestic product of Himachal Pradesh. Okay. Now obviously the increase in water supply to Delhi, it will be paid for by between Delhi and Himachal. And there will be an increase in some financial transfers from Delhi to Himachal Pradesh. Okay? But at the same time, this again goes on to the broader strategy of where Delhi should be getting its drinking water from. If it were to have a least cost strategy, it should be tapping its own groundwater. 30% of Delhi's drinking water comes from its own groundwater. And when you construct on the floodplains, as we have been doing, this is a favorite example which I like to give, but I'll repeat it again. See, we constructed on the floodplains of Delhi, whether it was the Commonwealth Village or whether it was the other one, the big temple, Akshardham temple. These are all constructions on the floodplains. They decrease the rainwater recharge into the groundwater. So Delhi has to depend for its water supply for transportation from long distances, transportation from Himachal Pradesh. Now the correct strategy, the least cost strategy for both Himachal and Delhi would be to look at their own water resources and do that. If we are planning centrally, we should first be looking at local water resources before we adopt high cost transfer of water from other states. Now we have moved away, but this